Hello and welcome to this interview with the winner of Sigma Xi, the Scientific Research Society's 2016 Young Investigator Award winner. My name is Heather Thorstensen and I am the Manager of Communications for Sigma Xi. The Young Investigator Award winner this year is Dr. Tiago Falk. He is an Associate Professor at the National Institute of Scientific Research in Montreal, Quebec. He is the director of the Multimedia Multimodal Signal Analysis and Enhancement Lab, known as the MUSI Lab. The Young Investigator Award recognizes excellent research from a Sigma Xi member who is within 10 years of receiving his or her highest earned degree. So congratulations, Dr. Falk. He will give a lecture at the Sigma Xi annual meeting this November in Atlanta. More information about that meeting is available online on Sigma Xi's website at www.sigmaxi.org. So since you are the Young Investigator Award winner, it's worth noting that you earned your PhD in 2008 in electrical engineering from Queen's University in Canada. Why were you pursuing electrical engineering?
So I've always been an engineer at heart, I guess even from an early age. And I did my undergraduate in Brazil in electrical engineering. And I always wanted to go into academia. I was involved in research at an early age at the bachelor's level. And as soon as I finished my undergraduate, I knew that growing abroad and getting my graduate studies was something that was needed to get a nice faculty position. And that's what I ventured out into doing. And I couldn't see myself doing anything else other than engineering at the time.
Okay, and so the lab that you're at today has a main purpose to investigate human and machine interactions. Could you talk about some of those human sides of what you're working on?
Sure. So the ideal of the lab is to bring together the human side and the machine side in human-machine interfaces. And it kind of brings in the two, so as I mentioned, my graduate studies was more on the multimedia aspect. And then I ventured off for a couple of years into a postdoc, more into the biomedical side, more into the human side. And after those 2 years, I had these two seemingly unrelated domains, and human-machine interfaces kind of brings them back together. But people typically just focus on the machine side when you talk about human-machine interaction or interfaces. And the goal of the lab was to see, well, can we focus on the human aspect or bring the human back into human-machine interfaces? So an example of what we try to do is, suppose you have a machine that is aware of its user's affective state. So is the person sad? Is the person happy? So it can adjust itself to the person's mood. You might have an interface which could be a hearing aid, and that hearing aid can adapt to the hearing profile automatically of the user. So if the user is in a noisy setting, it can detect the environment, and based on that person's hearing profile, it can adjust its settings automatically so that it maximizes the intelligibility for that particular user. So it's basically trying to understand as much information from the human or the user of the interface, so that the interface now has that knowledge. The interface now becomes adaptive, it becomes intelligent, and it becomes optimal to that particular user. So you can have an interface that comes out of a box off the shelf, and you put it on and it calibrates to that particular user. So it's going to be optimal to you. If you give it to somebody else, it adapts to that particular user. So it's always going to be optimal in that sense.
Okay, and now what about the machine side of that relationship?
So on the machine side now, you have today you have speech recognition, for example, you have vision, computer vision. There's a lot of interest now on brain-computer interfaces and human-machine interfaces where the human's body is actually controlling the technology. So you can visualize gestures, you have the Connect, which detects your gestures and it makes decisions based on your gestures. So we're trying to see how can we, with the human now in the equation and with a machine that's adaptable, how can you make the machine as adaptable as possible without the human actually notifying or actually detecting that the machine is updating itself. so that becomes transparent to the user. And a big limitation of existing machines today is when you put them within they work well if you're in a constrained environment, in a laboratory setting where it's quiet, the lights are always on, the person is sitting still, they work perfectly. Once you go outside, the lights change, the noise starts playing a factor, then the machines, they break down. Speech recognition doesn't work as well. Computer vision starts not working as well if there's a lot of movement. Gesture recognition becomes a problem. So a big part of the lab also, which is the name of the title of the lab, which is in the signal analysis and enhancement. So a big part of our research within the machines is how do you enhance the signals that are being input to the machine so that the machine can now perform well in a noisy environment, in an everyday environment, and the person is not constrained to a laboratory setting.
And some of that with enhancing the signal is also taking away some of those noisy signals. Is that right?
Yes. And one thing that we also do a lot here is typically people, they filter the noise out. So they say, okay, we're going to remove the noise from the speech signal so that speech recognition becomes nicer. In our case, we try to separate the source from the noise. And instead of just throwing away the noise, we actually use the noise and see if there's useful information there. So that's where some of the signal analysis aspect comes in. So what can you infer from the noise? So in speech, for example, if you can separate speech from the noise, we're able to infer what type of environment you're in. Are you in a large room versus a small room? How many people are around you? Is it lots of people talking? Is it just one or two? What is the perhaps age of the people around you? So instead of throwing away the noise, you can also look for patterns within the noise that could be useful. So if now you're a machine and your smartphone is aware that you've left your office and you're in the cafeteria and it's noisy, it can adapt itself so that the enhancement part kicks in, or it boosts the volume up so that you can hear better. If it detects that you have gone from an indoor to an outdoor setting, it will detect the light changes. So don't just throw away the noise. We try to mine as much information from the noise as possible as well.
And when you're talking about signals that you're receiving, it sounds like you're talking about signals from the person's environment, but it could also be some bio signals from the person's body. Is that correct?
Yes. So typically modalities that we work with can be vision. So these will be videos captured from cameras in a smartphone or a computer, voice or audio captured by microphones, or physiological signals measured by biomonitoring devices. And these are typically heart rate, respiration, brain signals. So typically the electroencephalogram, EEG. Those are the most common modalities that we investigate.
So how would some of the human and the machines come together with these interfaces and have applications? What kind of applications are you using?
So applications can be very wide. They can be applications specifically in the multimedia space. They can be applications in healthcare spaces. And so here in the lab, we have a number of different applications we've investigated. One example is how can you take advantage of speech coding techniques and use that to develop technologies for individuals that have severe disabilities. So they can't control their voices. They could be paralyzed. They have typically very severe disabilities, and they're not able to type. They can't speak. So they're basically locked within their bodies. And can you use these devices? Can you use cameras to try to infer what the person is trying to say? So maybe from a mouth opening, if they open their mouth, that becomes their control signal. So if you can detect from a camera them opening their mouths, if you can have them hum, if they're able to make sounds, they're not understandable sounds, but they can make some grunts or they could hum. Could you transfer that into a control signal? So we've used speech coding technologies to actually measure hums and different properties of the hum so that an individual can now drive a wheelchair based on humming. So if you hum, the pitch of your hum goes up, the wheelchair goes forward. If it goes down, the wheelchair goes backwards. If you keep a low pitch for a persistent amount of time, the wheelchair turns left. If you keep it high, the wheelchair goes right. So now you're using multimedia technologies together with a biosignal sensor that's measuring vibrations in the vocal cords, and you put it in an application which is driving the wheelchair. So now it allows a person that was in bed without completely dependent on their caregivers, and now it gives them some sort of freedom to move about. And you can use, we've tried this technology to turn on and off lights, put the volume on the TV up and down, so it gives them an independence. That's one application. Another that we're working on now is on, can you bring video games now into the equation and virtual reality, and develop video games that are specifically targeting parts of the brain that we know are affected by Alzheimer's disease. So we're looking at developing virtual reality games combined with brain monitoring and seeing if we can use that to help diagnose Alzheimer's disease. Today, a lot of the tools that are used are very expensive neural imaging technologies such as MRI, PET scans, and things like that. So we're seeing, can we bring that down to a device that maybe costs a couple $100 together with a virtual reality headset, and maybe bring the cost down to something less than $1,000 that could be used in low and medium income countries and things like that. So those are two more in the healthcare applications. If you were to talk about more on the multimedia side, if you suppose you're a video streaming service, and you're streaming videos to users, if you know the user's preferences, if you know how engaged the user is, if you know how emotionally attached to a specific movie or game that's going on, you can maximize the way you transfer your bits to that person so that you maximize their experience. So one example is, suppose you're on a fixed bit rate plan with your mobile service provider. You can only download so much per day, or let's say per month. And so typically you try to reduce that bit if you're watching a movie. But now if you know that person loves an action movie, and during the action scenes is when he becomes very engaged, and that's what drives that person to watch that kind of movie, you can lower the bit rate at other points in time, and then you can maximize that experience. So you can give them full-blown HD with surround sound whenever you're in the action scenes, and you can cut back on your bit rate at other points during the movie. So at the end, you still have the same overall bit rate, but you maximize that person's experience, because in the moments when he or she were really engaged in the movie, you gave them the maximum that you could give. So you're somehow adapting your multimedia streaming service so that it's maximizing the person's experience or their perception of experience. So that's another application where you can bring the two worlds, the human and the machine aspect, to take forward the multimedia side.
Okay, and I want to go back a little bit and talk about what you had mentioned about the tool that you developed to help people who couldn't talk because of their disabilities, and they were able to communicate with by noticing the hums that they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that was allowing people to communicate for the first time possibly in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and that you had accomplished that during your postdoc that you were doing. So as such a young part of your career, how was that to make such a direct impact on the lives of people?
It was very rewarding and invigorating. And this was so my postdoc was at the University of Toronto at the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. And it was in the department which was aimed for developing technologies for kids that had disabilities with which nothing that was in the market would work for them. So of all the assistive devices that were available in the market, they could not use for whatever number of reasons. So these had to be customized to a particular child or to a particular youth. And a lot of the kids that had come through, it was noticed that they had this type of they had very limited control of their arms, of their limbs, a lot of spastic movement in the head, but they still had somewhat intact their vocalizations. It wasn't something that they could actually spell out or say words, but they could make sounds. And what was unique about this is that these sounds and the hums, they cause a periodic vibration of the vocal cords. And this is the premises of speech coding. And my PhD and my earlier years had been on speech coding. So once I arrived, people were struggling with this. So just by bringing this multidisciplinary view, this view of speech that nobody had in this biomedical department, quickly we jumped into that idea. And today it's one of the technologies that I just spoke to Professor Tom Chow yesterday, who's the director of the lab. And he said there's roughly about 3 dozen people now that are actively using this device. And the first child that we tried it on apparently is so proficient today that he has programmed the device to play video games. So he can actually play Mortal Kombat video games just using hums. And I haven't seen it, but I was told that he plays just like any other kid with 2 hands and a controller plays. He does it with hums on a wheelchair. So I'm looking forward to maybe seeing a video of that soon.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, and that would be interesting to see.
But
go ahead.
Sorry, but bringing that capability of giving somebody the independence to, and a lot of the kids have gone on to write their autobiographies, because if you attach that to a what's called an on-screen flashing keyboard, so it flashes the rows of a keyboard versus the columns, and once they perform a hum, it stops at that particular letter. So now it gives them also the ability to write. So they can write, they can have pre-programmed messages stored on their device. So if they want to go to the bathroom, they can just play that message, and they can pick what voice. So you can have a synthetic voice that tells the messages out loud. So they can select what voices they want. So they can have character voices. It's a very fun. It was a very interesting period in my career, and I miss it a lot. So hopefully we'll get back to working with kids soon.
And I also saw that you've used this research for some mental health applications too. I saw the one about the remotely monitoring someone's state to see if they are seriously depressed. Could you explain how that one works?
Yeah, so that started as part of a challenge that's run every year by a multimedia organization. And what they do is they release audio visual content from individuals that have been rated by psychologists of having different depression levels. And the challenge is for individuals to come and develop technologies that will bring together the audio aspect and the vision aspect and try to predict what that person's particular mental state is or depression level is. So we participated a couple of years ago in this challenge, and we got some very interesting results. And we've been trying to take this technology forward. We've been finding that the audio aspect is, it contributed more than the vision part. So we've been looking at what can we infer from the speech signal. So what is the unique pattern that represents, that discriminates depression, a depressed versus a non-depressed person? What is so unique about their vocal patterns? And can we extract that information? Can we analyze the speech signal and extract that information? And that's particularly useful if you're, for example, in a suicidal hotline, where you have somebody that's calling in. You don't want somebody that's at high risk of committing suicide to be received with a, please hold, we are receiving a high number of calls now. So if you're able to maybe just from that initial call, initial 5 seconds of the person saying something, detect, oh, this person is very high risk, let's give him or her extreme priority, versus, oh, this person is okay, he can hang on for a few seconds. So it can allow for that kind of adaptation also within these hotlines.
And also, could you talk more about your Alzheimer's disease diagnosis and how that works?
Yeah, so we started with looking at, again, different ways of analyzing signals. So our expertise here is in signal processing. And by signal processing, I mean, can you clean up the signals? Can you extract information from the signals? What are new ways of looking at the signals? So can you take it into a different dimension where in that dimension you can easily see what is signal and what is noise, and can you infer specific details about the signal? So that's where a lot of our research comes in, as to how do you play with these signals? How do you extract this information from the signals? And we had come up with a new way of analyzing EEG signals. And we showed that those patterns were very discriminative of Alzheimer's patients versus typical healthy elderly subjects. And we got to a point where we could discriminate Alzheimer's, very, I would say, mid to moderate level of Alzheimer's disease, and healthy patients with more than 90% accuracy. But once you're at that level of Alzheimer's, of the disease, you don't need a machine to tell you this person has Alzheimer's disease. Any person can look at, any doctor can look and say, yeah, you have Alzheimer's disease. What we're interested in is developing machines that can help clinicians much more, or detect risks of the disease or detect sign of disease much earlier in the process. So even before you have symptoms, are you able to detect these things? And once we started looking at individuals that were high risk of developing Alzheimer's due to risk factors, perhaps families having it, genetic, and we started looking at these high risk individuals, the classifiers weren't so great anymore. And the reason was that we were just looking at the individuals at rest. So basically, we were measuring their signals when they were sitting down, closing their eyes at rest for a couple of minutes. And we came to the conclusion that just resting wasn't enough. We needed to get them to do some sort of activity that would elicit some sort of neural patterns that would discriminate, or that would help us discriminate if an individual had high risk of developing Alzheimer's or not. So this is something that we still have under study. We just had a quick pilot that we did that showed some interesting results. But one of the first things that dies in Alzheimer's disease is the hippocampus, which is partially related to how you find yourself in space. So as you move around in space, you have to go from point A to point B. How do you go from point A to point B? So typically that's one of the first symptoms of Alzheimer's disease is when you start losing that wayfinding skill. So that's why you see a lot of Alzheimer's patients getting lost easily, because they lose that wayfinding skill. So now we're investigating, well, if we have individuals within their virtual environment trying to go from point A to point B, and we monitor their neural signals or their neural signatures as they do that, are we able to bring this performance higher? So previously, with only the resting state, we were getting about 72% accuracy in discriminating an individual was going to eventually develop Alzheimer's. So we're hoping to bring that up now closer to the 90% that we had originally envisioned. So this is still some work in progress, but the idea there is to try to bring some of that knowledge that we have about Alzheimer's disease, about the actual, what the disorder is, what the disease causes in the brain, and what part of the brain is affected, what tasks can we do to elicit that part of the brain to become active, and how can we measure some of that information.
Okay. And you've been noted by the nominators who put your name up for this award as successfully leading interdisciplinary research teams. Do you have any advice about what it takes to successfully lead an interdisciplinary research team?
You have to be very open-minded, I think, is the main thing, because different people will come with very different ideas, and if you're not open to those new ideas, I think you will never get anywhere. And I think I learned a lot of that from my postdoc. Like, I had, most of my life had been on multimedia, speech coding, speech processing, and I arrived at my postdoc to do brain-computer interfaces, having never seen a brain signal in my life. So, but then the first thing that I realized when I arrived was that biomedical signal processing 8 years ago were using tools that in speech processing were being used 50 years ago. So I was able to look at the 50 years of speech processing, how it developed over those 50 years, and the new tools that were being used. I started playing around and seeing if they could be applied into biomedical signals. And in many, many cases, they gave results much, much better than what people were using back then. So if you're able to bring that knowledge from a different domain and somehow apply it to your to this new domain, you might be surprised as to what might come out. So being open to receiving these different people with different backgrounds and different ideas, I think is a big part. And I make an effort to do that. So I don't hire students or postdocs or researchers that have the same skill sets that I do. That would be somewhat redundant. So I try to bring people with very different skill sets, very different backgrounds, and that will make it complementary. So they will be bringing new ideas that I won't be able to come up with, or students in the lab won't be able to come up with. And I think that's key, is to be open to that. It's a risk. The person might come with, and no ideas might fly, but then again, if you don't take the risk, you can't reap the reward.
What type of backgrounds do people in your lab have?
We have physicists, we have computer scientists, we have engineers, biomedical engineers, electrical engineers. Every now and then we get somebody in the arts. They will come in to help with user design and to develop some of the interfaces for the games. But yeah, from computer science to engineering to physics. My lab technician is in astrophysics. He's doing his PhD in astrophysics.
And out of all the areas that you work with the human and machine interfaces, do you have a favorite application that you've worked on?
It's a good question. I don't want to put any favorites so students don't get upset.
Okay.
We try to work very closely with industry as well. I find that it's very disappointing when you have a technology that's developed that has great potential, but it just sits on the shelf somewhere and doesn't get used. So a lot of our tools are developed in combination with industry. It fills a gap that's there. And so a lot of the stuff we build has actual practical a practical application. It starts off already with that mentality that something will come out of it. Individuals with disabilities will benefit. Individuals with mental health will benefit. So there's always that end goal that we have. There's always that challenge that we have to meet, or that expectation, those outcomes that have to be achieved. And so I would say personally, for me, for example, the Hummer would be something that would be very high up there, because I see so many kids were touched by that. It brought new dynamics to the family. Now parents can talk to the kids. In many cases, there was a case of an individual who was 18. He had never spoken. The first time we tried them out and asked them to type something, the first thing he typed was, "Mom, I love you." So that was the first time in 18 years that child's mom could hear him say, "Mom, I love you." And something like that is priceless. So I think that would be a great example of something that really touches.
Mm-hmm. That is another thing that one of your nominators brought up, was that you are able to find solutions to problems rather than coming up with solutions and then looking for a problem to apply it to. Mm-hmm. And so do you think it is because of the way that you work with industry, or is that just the way that you've always thought about your research?
I think the way that I work with industry is more of a consequence. I think it's the way I approach research, more in being open, thinking outside the box. Like, why throw this information away if we can use it for something? So instead of just filtering out the noise, let's gather as much information from that as we can. So let's explore, let's analyze, let's see what's there. Let's play around.
Where do you think your lab is headed in the future?
Where it's headed, I hope to great places. We're at a point now where a lot of the students are graduating. So we're now bringing a bunch of new students in. I would say the majority of people, maybe out of the 15, just a couple will remain this year. Most of them will be graduating. Most already have found jobs and have moved on. So this year will be a year where a lot of new blood will come in. A lot of new ideas will come in, new backgrounds. So it's kind of hard to say where we're going to be in the next couple of years, given that we're at this critical point now where there's so much new blood coming in that it's kind of hard to predict where we're going. But we have several projects in the pipeline. We have several big projects that are starting this year. Monitoring, for example, the stress level of police officers and first responders in the environment. So when they are out in the field running around where noise is a big factor, so how can you infer their mental states within these realistic environments? So that's one project that we have up and running. And several others looking at adaptive interfaces, mining the noise so that you get an information about the environment, how to make the machines intelligent. So we're going to be putting a lot of effort in those domains once these new students arrive.
Great. Okay. Well, for anybody who would like to see Dr. Falk speak, he will be at the Sigma Xi annual meeting in November. And thank you very much, Dr. Falk, for speaking with me today.
Thank you.